So there's this massive standoff happening at the Texas border. We're talking state troopers facing off against federal agents. It's a huge deal. But what's really driving this constitutional showdown? Well, in this explainer, we're going to break down the arguments from Texas Congressman Chip Roy. He sees this as way more than a policy debate. He's framing it as a fight for the country's survival. And get this, his proposed solution could even bring the U.S. military onto American soil. Let's get into it. Right off the bat, Congressman Roy doesn't mince words. He frames this in the most serious way possible. We're not talking about a simple debate over paperwork or asylum claims here. Nope. His core argument is all about immediate public safety. And that's the justification being used for the pretty extreme measures Texas is taking right now.
So what's really at the heart of this standoff? It all boils down to this one fundamental conflict: state duty versus federal authority.
And here you can see the two competing claims laid out side by side. On one hand, Texas says, look, we have a duty to protect our people and enforce the law, especially if the federal government isn't going to. But on the other hand, the federal government points right to the Constitution, specifically the Supremacy Clause, the part that says federal law trumps state law, and argues that immigration is their job and their job alone. This is that constitutional collision point we're talking about. Okay, so the real key to the Texas argument is this. It's pretty clever, actually. They say they're not defying the federal government. Instead, they argue they're just stepping in where the federal government has completely failed in its duty. So by framing it that way, as Washington dropping the ball, they justify their own actions. They're saying, hey, we're just filling a dangerous vacuum. And that specific framing is what takes us from a simple policy disagreement to a full-blown physical confrontation right there at the border.
Now, to justify a confrontation this big, you have to define the threat, right? So when Congressman Roy talks about the most dangerous people, who is he actually talking about?
And the dangers he cites are, well, they're incredibly severe. The argument being made directly links what's happening at the border to thousands of deaths from fentanyl right inside Texas. But it doesn't stop there. It also points to violent criminals. We're talking rapists and murderers from places like Guatemala and Mexico, is the kind of threat that, according to this view, current federal policy is just letting walk right in. And listen to this. The language used to describe the opposition is just as intense. This isn't being framed as a normal policy debate between two sides. No, it's presented as a full-on ideological battle against what's called the radical Marxist left. Using rhetoric like that, it just completely elevates the stakes. It portrays opponents as not just being wrong, but as a group that's actively and even intentionally putting Texans in danger. Okay, so when you frame the stakes this high, the solution you propose is probably going to be pretty dramatic too. And it is. The interview points to a really powerful and honestly very rarely used federal tool, the Insurrection Act.
So what is the Insurrection Act? Well, it's a sole law. It goes all the way back to 1807. And it gives the president the incredible power to use the U.S. military inside the country to shut down civil disorder or a rebellion. Actually invoking it is almost unheard of and always super controversial. That fact alone tells you just how severely this whole border situation is being viewed.
And here's how the proposed plan would work, in 3 steps. First, the president would invoke the act. Then, that federal authority would be used to shut down any interference from the state, basically ending this standoff by force. And the final step? Federal officials would take over completely, enforce the law, and remove anyone they define as dangerous.
But the argument doesn't just stop at security. No, there's another layer here. This final piece of the puzzle connects the entire conflict to a very specific political motivation, and that's control of the ballot box. And this quote really lays the political accusation right out in the open. The argument being made here is that the real goal of current border policies is to remake America. And how? By creating a situation where non-citizens could eventually vote, which would completely and permanently change the country's political map. So, when you boil it all down, the entire issue of border security is being presented as a fight over one core principle: that only American citizens should be the ones deciding American elections. From that point of view, this whole conflict at the border isn't just about law enforcement anymore. It's about defending the integrity of the vote itself from what's described as a deliberate political strategy. So, we've walked through the arguments about imminent threats, about federal failure, about political motivations, and it all leaves us with this huge unresolved question. Where exactly is the line between a state's right to keep itself safe and the federal government's constitutional authority? The answer to that isn't just going to decide what happens in Texas. It's going to help define the balance of power in America for a long, long time.